This is the Healthcare Marketplace Specialization, Healthcare Marketplace Overview. I'm Steve Parenti, and this is Module 4.3.2, Preparing a Global Health Technology Dossier. So, even the notion of just calling this a Global Healthcare Technology Dossier, well, what this really is getting at is that many times when one is preparing the case, if you will, for approving a new medical technology and getting it on the market, it's really a global affair. It's an international affair, hence not just calling it a case, but since we're more international, dossier. So to underscore the role of what health economists do in this space, there's sort of several things we need to talk about in this dossier components. First of all, there's the meeting, if you will, of health technology assessment standards, and this is actually academic standards that show up in peer-reviewed journals. Literally, there's several different journals that focus exclusively on the notion of pharmacoeconomics and health technology assessment. It needs to detail, this dossier needs to detail the role of basically a global reimbursement strategy and how the dossier will support that global reimbursement strategy. And then they also have to consider how that technology will be deployed in terms of safety and efficacy across the globe. So one thing that happens when you're preparing a dossier is to look back at the pre-phase 1 stuff, particularly in pharma, and see whether or not there's enough information to support basically the evidence required for a technology assessment that the economists need to do. This is actually a major problem because usually the economists are brought in way later beyond phase 1 to say, hey, fix this. And a lot of times the data that's going to be needed to make the cost effectiveness analysis is not there. So what happens? We need to have validation of assumptions driving the business opportunity to support that technology's initial development. There needs to be validation of the epidemiology, that is the study of diseases or specific diseases, whether it be diabetes or heart conditions, and figure out what the market opportunities might be for that disease state, similar to what Vision 2010 did with Medtronic. There needs to be a coherent and consistent assessment for comparative clinical performance to see how this technology will do with a prior technology. There needs to be some sense of looking at what the claims that are made for cost effectiveness are really backed up by the right data. There needs to be some thought of thinking about what's going to happen in a changing competitive environment. And then also, particularly for drugs, the idea of therapeutic class reviews, understanding that it is a very crowded world working with different drugs that are operating on different body systems, and that you need to basically make sure that you have all the elements there in case you're critiqued for not being as effective as you could be for a particular condition. So what's going to be in that structure then? There's going to be some information about what is the target disease you're looking at and what classification is it going to fall into in terms of chronic, acute, and how it's going to be taken care of. So there's going to be evidence from epidemiologists on how the disease is transgressing and progressing and where you actually intervene. There's going to be evidence of how the disease and the drug or the technology is used together with provider treatment patterns. What's the cost? What resources are being used with physician visits, hospital services, other drugs, ancillary technologies. A very thorough description of what the product actually is and how it activates clinically. There needs to be some sense of what the comparators are going to be for this technology. There has to be a clinical summary of other technologies that are there. Meta-analysis is a fancy word for basically a very structured literature review where you're not just reviewing the literature, but you have very specific blanks that you need to fill in terms of cost and technology comparisons from your technology compared to other models that are out there. You need to have your cost effectiveness analysis put into place and not just have that quality number, but then take your quality estimate and then apply it to what the systematic impact is for a particular country. And then finally come up with what you have in mind for monitoring and verification over a long period of time. That could be through the phase 4 trials that we talked about for the U.S. as an example. So a dossier must also identify all the key markets and segments that we're going into. We mentioned a little bit before. When we think about the U.S. market, we have to think about managed care, which is really the private insurance market, the VA, Medicaid, and Medicare. The Affordable Care Act, I think, doesn't change any of this. The Affordable Care Act actually only operates on probably about 3% or 4% of this population in terms of the impact that's currently out there. The European Union, UK, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, Canada, Australia, Japan, as we mentioned before, and then any of the developing countries that'll come into play here as well. And when this is done, and the dossier really needs to make sure that there's apples-to-apple comparisons that are being made. That's why we use one term, quality-adjusted light years saved, or some other terms too, but they have to be, all the technologies that you're comparing to must use that same terminology. So the product claims must be presented in terms that make them empirically evaluable. The claims must not be rejected. Manufacturers must present and get agreement as to which claims are going to be able to be supported in their cost effectiveness analysis to look at what goes on with the system impacts at the national level and basically what fits the dossier. And then the manufacturers must agree to process what is going to be monitored and validated in the long term so that that could be detailed also in the dossier. And then finally, a thing that really is a problem is that many times people do this. It's a major effort. It costs a lot of money, literally millions of dollars. But the problem we run into is over the balance of the life cycle, the dossier has to be updated and reflect not only the results of the product claims, but the monitoring components of what goes on. And so the dossier should support ongoing disease area and therapeutic class reviews. There should be updated literature reviews, or at least for the meta-analysis, but if nothing else, maybe some articles that talk about how it's still doing against this comparison, and then a reevaluation of cost-effectiveness analysis over a period of time. Again, these things cost money, but if they're not done, they can really damage the long-term viability of a product by essentially staying static with your initial analysis and not realizing it's a very dynamic market. This concludes our module on the healthcare technology dossier.